We received audio from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources on Friday related to the Nolan Wells case. That recording, a call made from a teen on a boat at Horn Island on July 4th at around 4 p.m. to a
Detail Assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
All right, of course. How far is the water coming up, sir? Can you give me a description? Ankles?
What'd
Hello?
you say? Hey.
Yes. How far is the water coming up, sir?
It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. Like we're going down now.
All right. Well, let's get you going. Membership number or phone number listed on the account, sir?
I don't know the phone number. It's either. I think it's. Try that.
All right.
I know we have a membership, like guaranteed. I don't have the tag
Unless
on
you
here.
have a
It got ripped
membership
off.
number or anything, it's okay. I'll get you over to the captain. What's the best phone number to reach you at?
Reach me at 2.
All right. And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's
How
on
many?
board.
All right. Do you need the United States Coast Guard?
What?
Do you need the United States Coast Guard?
No, we do not need that.
All right. All right. Do you have your current GPS coordinates?
Let me go look.
If not, I can send you a text message.
North. Are you ready?
Yes, sir. I'm available.
North 30 degrees by 4672.
All right. 4672. All right. And you were breaking up a little bit. Can you just repeat it one more time to make sure I have it correct?
Sorry, look.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, what?
So you're breaking up. If you need assistance, do you have a VHF radio?
No, we do not have the VHF radio.
All right. Well, let's try to get you going because you don't have good cell phone reception. Can you verify your coordinates one more time?
Okay, my coordinates are 30 degrees by 14.684 north, and then west by 88 degrees by 46.79.
Right. Looks like you're on Horn Island, correct? Are you
Yes,
on
we are
Horn
at Horn
Island?
Island. Yes.
All right. Is the boat sinking or you have it aground?
We were sinking, yes.
Is it aground is the question?
No, we're not aground. We are in
Okay.
17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water.
All right. Have to ask. What do you want to do? Do you want to be towed back?
I want to get this boat unsank and towed back, yes.
All right. Where would you like it towed to, sir?
You can tow it to Ocean Springs Harbor, or Fort Bayou Launch.
All right. How many adults and children on board?
No, there's no children.
So, is there anybody on board? How many adults, sir? That was the question. Hello, can you hear me?
Gotta jump in and pull the plug while you're going.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yep, I just need you to answer these questions so I can get you over to the captain.
Okay.
How many
what's
adults
going
on board?
So, there's 0 adults on board.
There's nobody on board the boat?
No. Nobody
right.
here is over the age of 21.
Sir, that was not the question. Is there a person? Is there a person, a living individual on the boat?
Hello?
Is there a living person, someone breathing on the boat? Is there anybody on the boat?
Yes, there's lots of people breathing on the boat.
All right, how many people, sir?
Like 7.
All right, thank you. Does everyone have life jackets on or available to them?
Yes, we have life jackets available.
All right. Verify what boat's sinking.
a Triton, 22-foot offshore, 22-foot Triton offshore sea flight hull.
All right. All right. Please hold. I'm transferring you to the local captain now.
Okay, thank you.
This is Captain Seth.
Hi, Captain Seth. This is Vicky from International. How you doing today?
Doing good. How are you?
Good, good. I apologize ahead of time. I really do. You're going to have a fee-for-service come up under...
Okay.
It sounds like a bunch of kids on board on Horn Island. He's letting me know that his father's a member, but he can't give me any information. And he's saying the boat is sinking, and he's on Horn Island. It's just unfortunate. He's just a kid. There's a lot going on. So
Right.
he said there's about a lot of people on board. He says he thinks about 7. I'm guessing they're all under 18.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to be rude. He wants you guys to go out there and unpump the boat and then tow it in.
Do you know what kind of boat it is?
He said a Triton 24-footer, but that's all he can give me.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just actually got off the phone with his grandpa, who I'm guessing is the owner of the boat. And he said,
Okay.
I just hung up with him. He said that they don't need any help right now, but if something changes, he'll call me back. So
Right.
I'm guessing that they may have figured it out, because that's what he said. So they're in a panic and their boat won't crank.
Yeah, they're in a panic. He's saying the
So-
bilge is not keeping up. I asked for Coast Guard. He said no, but he's just really upset on the back end. And, I get it. It's a
Okay.
kid. He just doesn't understand.
Oh, okay. Do you still have him on the line?
Yes, I still have him on the line. And, again, I couldn't find he couldn't give me anything regarding his grandfather's, membership, so it's just under fee-for-service.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just talked to. If you want to, we're so tied up right now. We can't really do any non-member jobs right now.
Is he a member? Did you find out if he was a member or not?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's his boat or what. I'm not sure what's going on with it. But yeah, transfer the kid over. I'll talk to him, and then I'll call his grandpa back as well.
All right. And did you want me to look up membership number or anything like that to see if he's up? I know you guys are
You can
swamped.
try this cell phone number.
Yes, sir.
Anything on this phone number?
All right. Yep. Yeah, he's an active member. Hold on.
What kind of boat do you have on there? Same boat?
Yeah, he's one of your members. Yep, 22-foot Triton. All right. I'll just disregard this one. I'm gonna send you over an accurate one under this one. Okay. He's one of your members. You'll get in a couple minutes. Okay.
Okay, perfect. All right, and yeah, just transfer this kid over whenever you get a chance.
All right. Transferring now. Thank you again, Captain.
All
Stay
righty.
safe out there. It's crazy. Have a drink.
Oh, it's wild. All righty, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hello? Hello?
A routine call to a marine towing company. A panicked voice reporting a boat taking on water near a remote barrier island. And buried somewhere in the static and background noise of that recording, sounds that thousands of people online now believe tell a completely different story than the one being spoken out loud. What really happened on Horn Island on July 4th, and why, more than 3 weeks after an 18-year-old college athlete was found dead in the Gulf of Mexico, does his death certificate still read undetermined? Before we go any further, I need to tell you exactly what we're doing here tonight and what we're not doing. This is not a video built on speculation. This is not a conspiracy theory breakdown. This is a careful, methodical examination of verified facts in a case that has generated more questions than answers since the moment it began. We're going to walk through documented timeline entries, official recordings obtained through public records requests, and statements made on the record by law enforcement and family members. We're going to separate what can be proven from what's being claimed. And we're going to do it in a way that respects the fact that behind every timestamp and every transcript line, there's a mother who still doesn't know what happened to her son. If that's the kind of coverage you're looking for in true crime, something that prioritizes accuracy over algorithm, then you're in exactly the right place. Take a second right now and subscribe to Mr. Story's Crime Vault. Hit that like button so this video reaches people who want the truth more than they want a theory. Because what we're about to walk through together is disturbing enough on its own without anyone needing to add a single word to it. Let's begin with the person at the center of all of this. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old when he died. He grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a tight-knit coastal community where everybody knows everybody. And Friday night football isn't just a game, it's the pulse of the town. He was one of 6 children raised by Christine and Elmore Wansley. By all accounts, he was the kind of kid who made people feel included. His high school coach described him as someone who led by example rather than volume. His teammates followed what he did more than what he said. That's a rare quality in anyone, let alone a teenager. After graduating from Ocean Springs High School, Nolan walked on as a freshman wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He wore number 16. He stood 6'1", weighed 185 pounds, and had just completed his first year on campus. He was scheduled to return to school on Monday, July 6th, for summer training camp. That date matters. It means this wasn't some open-ended summer vacation, with nowhere to be and no responsibilities waiting. He had 2 days. 2 days to enjoy the holiday weekend before the real work of preparing for his first full college football season began. That context is important because it explains why he was even out on the water that day. This wasn't a reckless trip or an impulsive decision. It was a tradition. For years, kids from Ocean Springs and the surrounding Gulf Coast communities had made the same trip to the same island every 4th of July. Nolan had been before. His friends had been before. It was supposed to be exactly like every other year, except it wasn't. To understand what happened next, you need to understand Horn Island itself, not just as a dot on a map, but as a place that shapes every single aspect of how this case unfolded, and why so many basic questions remain unanswered 22 days later. Horn Island is part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, a federally protected barrier island sitting approximately 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. It has no permanent residents, no roads, no stores, no restrooms, no lifeguard stations, no cell towers providing reliable coverage. It is reachable only by private or charter boat. Once you step onto that sand, you are cut off from the infrastructure most of us take for granted every single day of our lives. That isolation is exactly what makes the island appealing to people looking for an undeveloped stretch of beach. But on the 4th of July, it transforms into something else entirely. Witnesses have described hundreds of young people scattered across that sand, boats anchored in clusters offshore, music carrying across the water from one group to another. It's the kind of scene that plays out on that exact stretch of coastline every single year on that exact holiday. And by every account available, nothing about that particular afternoon appeared unusual to anyone there. But that geography has massive implications for this investigation. It explains why there were no security cameras anywhere near where Nolan was last seen alive. It explains why cell phone location data from that afternoon is thin or non-existent, because a phone with no signal doesn't ping a tower and doesn't leave the kind of digital breadcrumb trail investigators depend on in almost every other missing person case. It explains why the only meaningful record of that boat's movements comes from a single piece of onboard navigation equipment. And it explains why the initial response to Nolan going missing ran into genuine jurisdictional confusion, because Horn Island sits in open water, and which agency holds primary responsibility for a case originating there isn't always immediately obvious. Now let's talk about the call, not the speculation about what might be buried in the background static. We'll get to that. First, let's talk about what is absolutely, undeniably, verifiably on that recording in the foreground where every word is crystal clear. On July 4th, a call was placed to a company called CTOW. This is critical to understand. CTOW is not 911. It is not the Coast Guard. It is a private, membership-based marine towing and assistance service. Think of it like roadside assistance for cars, except for boats. You pay an annual membership fee, and in exchange, towing and certain emergency services are covered or discounted. Non-members can still call, but they get billed at a higher rate. The company is staffed by dispatchers and boat captains, whose job is to get disabled vessels off the water as quickly and efficiently as possible. They are not law enforcement. They are not trained to detect deception or distress beyond the immediate mechanical problem being reported. They are, in the most literal sense, a tow truck service for boats. That distinction matters because it explains the entire tone of the conversation you're about to hear described. A dispatcher named Vicky answered the call. The caller was a young male voice. He identified his location as the west tip of Horn Island and said the boat's bilge pump had stopped working. For anyone unfamiliar with boats, a bilge pump is a small automatic pump installed in the lowest part of a vessel's hull. Its job is to remove water that accumulates there from rain, waves, or minor leaks. When it fails, that water just keeps rising. Depending on how fast it's coming in, that can range from a minor inconvenience to a life-threatening emergency. The caller told Vicky the boat was sinking and asked if Cito could come help. He mentioned having a membership. Vicky asked how far the water had risen. The caller said it was coming up, that they were going down. She asked for a membership number or the phone number listed on the account. The caller couldn't provide one immediately. He eventually gave a name, Jerry, and said he thought the membership was under that account. Vicky said she'd transfer him to a captain and asked for the best number to reach him. He provided it. Then she asked a question that should have been routine. Is everybody on board in good health? The caller said yes. Then Vicky asked another question. Do you need the United States Coast Guard? The caller's response is right there in the undisputed transcript. No, we do not need that. Let that sit for a second. A boat described as sinking, with water rising in the hull, with 7 people aboard, all of them under the age of 21, and when directly asked if the Coast Guard is needed, the answer is no. Vicky didn't push back. That wasn't her job. She asked for GPS coordinates. The caller provided them. She asked him to repeat them because he was breaking up. He did. The coordinates placed the boat near Horn Island. Vicky asked if the boat was aground or actually sinking. The caller clarified they were not aground. They were in 31 feet of water. Vicky asked what the caller wanted to do. He said he wanted the boat unpumped and towed back to shore. She asked how many people were aboard. The caller initially seemed confused by the phrasing. When she clarified she was asking how many adults, he said 0. She asked again, is there anybody on board? He said nobody over the age of 21. She pressed. Is there a living person on the boat? He said yes. Lots of people breathing. About 7 total. Vicky asked if everyone had life jackets available. The caller said yes. She confirmed the vessel type, a 22-foot Triton offshore center console. Then she told him to hold while she transferred him to the local captain. His name was Captain Seth. During that transfer, something significant happened. Vicky told Captain Seth that she had also just gotten off the phone separately with the caller's grandfather, who she understood to be the boat's owner, and that grandfather, according to Vicky, had told her they didn't need help right now but would call back if something changed. Read that again. 2 different accounts of urgency, within minutes of each other, about the same boat. One caller describing water rising in the hull and requesting a tow. Another person, identified as the boat owner's grandfather, telling the same company that help might not even be necessary. Captain Seth told Vicky that he'd just spoken to the grandpa himself and been told the same thing, that they had it under control. Vicky confirmed the membership was active under the name provided and said she'd send over the accurate service request. Captain Seth asked her to transfer the kid over so he could talk to him directly. But when Vicky went back to the line to transfer the call, there was no response. She gave the caller a few seconds. Still nothing. She said she'd be disconnecting due to lack of response, and that was the end of the call. Now here's where we need to pump the brakes hard, because this is the exact moment where a huge amount of online content about this case veers off into territory that cannot be verified. Multiple independent creators have claimed that if you listen closely to the background of that recording, underneath the foreground conversation with the dispatcher, you can hear additional voices, and that among those voices you can make out specific phrases, a name being called with urgency, a question about whether someone is dead, an instruction to check someone's chest. We are not going to tell you those claims are true. We are also not going to tell you they are false. What we are going to tell you is this. No law enforcement agency has issued any statement confirming or denying that those specific words are present in that audio. No credentialed forensic audio analyst has gone on record authenticating that interpretation. What is circulating online are individual listeners' own subjective interpretations of garbled, distant background noise on a low-quality phone call recorded outdoors on open water, with wind, engine noise, and multiple people talking at once. Human auditory perception, especially when it comes to distinguishing words buried in noise, is far less reliable than most people assume. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where the brain, when presented with ambiguous sound, will actually construct words and phrases that aren't objectively there. This effect becomes even stronger when a listener is told in advance what they should be hearing. It's the same mechanism behind people claiming to hear hidden messages in songs played backward. Once you're told what to listen for, it becomes almost impossible not to hear it, whether it was ever really there or not. Professional forensic audio analysis exists specifically because of this problem. A legitimate forensic examination of a recording like this would involve isolating specific frequency bands, running the file through specialized software designed to separate overlapping voices, and having multiple independent analysts transcribe the same segment without being told what anyone else heard. Even then, credible labs report findings with stated confidence levels rather than absolute certainty, because degraded outdoor audio over a cell connection is one of the hardest categories of evidence to authenticate. None of that process has been publicly documented for this recording. So we are not building a theory on top of disputed background noise. We are focusing on what is undeniably, verifiably present in the foreground of that call, and the foreground alone raises serious questions. A boat taking on water, 7 young people aboard. Coast Guard assistance declined, the boat owner separately saying help might not be needed, and then the caller disconnecting before the transfer to the captain was complete. You don't need a theory about hidden words to find that timeline troubling. It's right there in plain, undisputed language. So what happened next? By all available accounts, the group's boat made it back to shore that evening without Nolan aboard. For a stretch of hours after that, nobody called Christine. Not because anyone was actively hiding anything from her, but because the same group had made the same trip together before, and a single evening without word from an 18-year-old on a holiday weekend wasn't yet registering in anyone's mind as an outright emergency. That changed around 11 o'clock that night when Christine's phone finally rang. It wasn't Nolan calling, it was one of his friends. Christine has said publicly more than once that this was the exact moment something inside her shifted. A friend calling her directly at that hour, on that night, simply wasn't something that happened under ordinary circumstances. She knew immediately something was genuinely wrong. Around that same time, according to public reporting, a separate call was placed to the United States Coast Guard to report Nolan missing. The Coast Guard's response, as later reported, was that the situation as described to them did not meet the threshold required for immediate deployment. No cutter went out that night. No aircraft went up. The call was logged and closed within minutes. That decision, made in the very first hour that anyone in an official capacity was told something was wrong, would later become one of the quieter but more consequential details in this entire case, because it directly meant that hours passed before any organized search response actually began. Christine spent the rest of that night trying to track her son down herself. When she finally turned to law enforcement for help, she ran into a problem nobody had warned her about in advance. Horn Island sits out in open water, and which agency actually held jurisdiction over a missing person case originating there wasn't immediately clear to anyone she initially spoke with. She has described a frustrating back and forth between different departments before the Jackson County Sheriff's Office finally agreed to open a formal missing person report. Later that same night, she and Elmore met a deputy in a McDonald's parking lot and laid out everything they knew. By morning, Elmore couldn't wait on official process any longer. He took his own boat out on July 5th and searched the waters near Horn Island entirely by himself. A father physically combing open water while an organized official search effort was simultaneously standing up on shore. A command post was established at a boat launch in Ocean Springs. The search grew quickly to include the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, the Coast Guard, and the United Cajun Navy, a well-known volunteer search and rescue organization. The Cajun Navy's own incident commander said publicly that the organization heard directly from Nolan's mother and moved fast, deploying boats, drones, and personnel within hours. For 2 full days, that search covered both land and water around Horn Island. No result. Then early on the morning of Monday, July 6th, at approximately 8:45, a National Park Service ranger spotted a body in the water along the island's northwestern shore. Sheriff John Ledbetter personally confirmed it matched the physical description investigators had been circulating for Nolan Wells. The search for Nolan as a living person was over. The search for what actually happened to him was only beginning. 22 days later, there is still no official cause of death on record, no official manner of death, no date of death listed on any public document. That is not a gap in our reporting. That is the actual current state of this case. An 18-year-old college athlete went to a barrier island on the 4th of July with friends he'd known for years, doing something he'd done before, and 2 days later his body was found in the water. And more than 3 weeks after that, the state of Mississippi has not publicly determined how he died. Christine Wansley has taken steps on her own. She commissioned an independent autopsy. The results of that autopsy were read aloud at a national press conference. She has also filed in court to become the administrator of her son's estate. That filing happened quietly, without fanfare, without a media event. It is a legal maneuver that suggests she is preparing for a longer fight than anyone hoped this would be. The state conducted its own autopsy. That report still has not been made public. We don't know what it says. We don't know if it contradicts the independent findings. We don't know if it offers any clarity at all. What we know is that it exists, and it's being held. Meanwhile, that CTO call sits in the public record. The GPS data from the boat's onboard chart plotter was extracted by a Mississippi Department of Marine Resources officer under a signed consent to search form. That data is real. It shows where that boat went, when it went there, and how long it stayed. We're going to walk through that data in the second part of this coverage, because it deserves its own careful examination, and it connects directly to the independent autopsy findings in ways that cannot be ignored. But before we get there, it's worth pausing on something that doesn't require any disputed audio interpretation or any forensic analysis at all. It only requires you to think like a parent for 10 seconds. Your 18-year-old son is out on a boat with 6 other kids, all of them under 21, on a remote island with no cell service and no emergency infrastructure. That boat starts taking on water. And when asked directly if the Coast Guard should be called, someone on that boat says no. What possible reason explains that answer? What scenario makes that response make sense? A mechanical failure serious enough to warrant a call for help, but not serious enough to involve the agency specifically designed to respond to maritime emergencies. A situation dire enough that water is rising in the hull, but calm enough that the boat's owner is simultaneously telling the towing company that everything might actually be fine? Those aren't theories. Those are questions raised by the undisputed transcript of a verified call, and they're questions that 22 days later still don't have public answers. Here's what we know happened in the hours after Nolan's body was found. The scene was treated as a recovery, not a rescue. Marine Resources officers documented the location. The body was transported to the state medical examiner. Formal identification was made. Family was notified. A missing person case became a death investigation, and then the information stopped flowing. There was no immediate press conference announcing a cause of death. No official statement about whether foul play was suspected. No timeline given for when the public might expect answers. The agencies involved in the search quietly stepped back. The volunteers went home. The command post was dismantled, and Christine was left waiting. She has been remarkably composed in the few public statements she's made. She has thanked the search teams. She has asked for privacy. She has also made it clear that she will not stop asking questions until she has real answers. The independent autopsy she commissioned wasn't cheap. The legal filing to administer her son's estate wasn't symbolic. These are the actions of someone who understands that waiting on official channels might mean waiting forever. There are people online right now who believe they've solved this case based on what they think they hear in the background of a 10-minute phone call. There are others who think the whole thing is being covered up by agencies with something to hide. There are others still who think this was a tragic accident being turned into a conspiracy by people who can't accept that sometimes young people die on the water without anyone being at fault. All of those positions share one thing in common. They're built on assumptions that go beyond what can currently be proven. We are not doing that here. We are sticking to documents. We are sticking to verified statements. We are sticking to timelines that can be corroborated through official records. And even within those boundaries, the story that emerges is deeply unsettling. A boat in distress that declined emergency services. A grandfather saying help wasn't needed, while a caller described the vessel sinking. A missing person report delayed by jurisdictional confusion. A Coast Guard deployment denied in the critical first hours. A body found 2 days later in water not far from where the boat had been. And more than 3 weeks after that, no public explanation for how an 18-year-old athlete in the prime of his life ended up dead. The second part of this case is going to focus on what the GPS data actually shows, what the independent autopsy actually found, and why those 2 pieces of hard evidence raise questions that go far beyond anything anyone thinks they heard in a recording. Because if the timeline documented by that boat's own navigation system is accurate, and if the medical findings are what they've been reported to be, then some of the initial explanations offered for Nolan's death don't line up. Not in a speculative way, in a mathematical way, in a way that demands reconciliation. But we're not getting ahead of that. We're building this carefully, piece by piece, document by document, so that when we do present those findings, you'll have all the context you need to understand why they matter. This is not a case that benefits from shortcuts. It's not a case that gets clearer when you skip steps. It's a case that only makes sense when you slow down and follow the actual evidence where it actually leads. Nolan Wells was a son, a brother, a teammate, and a friend. He was 18 years old. He had a future that included a sophomore football season, a degree, a life beyond the one he'd already started building. That future ended on or around July 4th on Horn Island, and the people responsible for determining how and why that happened have not yet provided a public answer that his mother can carry forward. That's not an accusation, it's a fact. And it's the fact that makes everything else in this case worth examining with the level of care and patience it deserves. Because behind every timestamp, every GPS coordinate, every autopsy finding, and every unanswered question, there's a family that has been waiting 22 days for someone in authority to look them in the eye and tell them the truth. If you want to stay with this case as it develops, if you want the next update as soon as verified information becomes available, then subscribe to Mr. Story's Crime Vault right now. This is not a channel that prioritizes speed over accuracy. This is not a channel that builds content on rumors. This is a place where we follow documents, not gossip. And in a case like this one, where emotion is running high and speculation is everywhere, that approach matters more than ever. Hit the like button, turn on notifications, and let's see this through together the right way. Before we get into the GPS data, the autopsy findings, and everything else that makes this case more complicated than anyone initially realized, we need to spend real time on something that's generating massive attention online, but hasn't been verified by anyone with the authority to verify it. Because understanding the difference between what sounds compelling and what's actually been authenticated is the only way to approach a case like this one responsibly. Multiple creators analyzing the CTO call have claimed that if you listen carefully to the background audio, underneath the foreground conversation with the dispatcher, you can hear additional voices. And that among those voices, specific words and phrases are audible, a name being called out, a question about whether someone is dead, an instruction to check someone's chest. Those claims have spread widely. They've been shared thousands of times. And they've led some people online to conclude with absolute certainty that they know exactly what happened on that boat. Here's what we need to be crystal clear about. No law enforcement agency has issued any statement confirming or denying that those specific words are present in that recording. No named credentialed forensic audio analyst has gone on record authenticating that interpretation. What's circulating are individual listeners' own subjective takes on garbled, distant background noise captured on a low-quality phone call recorded outdoors on open water with wind, engine noise, and multiple people talking at once. Human auditory perception, especially when it comes to picking out specific words buried in static and noise, is far less reliable than most people assume. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon where the human brain, when presented with ambiguous sound, will actually construct words and phrases that aren't objectively there. This effect becomes dramatically stronger when you're told in advance what you should be listening for. It's the exact same mechanism behind people claiming to hear hidden messages in songs played backward or voices captured in static on ghost hunting shows. Once someone tells you what to hear, it becomes almost impossible not to hear it, whether it was genuinely there in the first place or not. Professional forensic audio analysis exists specifically because of this problem. A legitimate forensic examination would involve isolating specific frequency bands, running the audio through specialized software designed to separate overlapping voices, and having multiple independent analysts transcribe the same segment without being told what anyone else believes they heard. Even then, credible forensic labs report their findings with stated confidence levels rather than absolute certainty, because degraded outdoor audio over a cell connection with environmental noise layered on top is genuinely one of the hardest categories of evidence to authenticate with any confidence. None of that rigorous process has been publicly documented for this specific recording. What's circulating instead are individuals listening to the same short clip repeatedly, often with audio enhancement software of unknown quality and reliability, and then presenting their own transcription as though it were an established finding. That is a meaningfully different thing from an authenticated forensic conclusion, and that difference matters enormously in a case like this one, where the disputed interpretation is being used in some corners of the internet to accuse specific named individuals, several of whom appear to still be teenagers, of having caused a death and covered it up. We're spending this much time on this point not because we think the theory is definitely wrong. It's because we genuinely don't know, and neither does anyone else circulating it right now. Treating an unauthenticated interpretation of background noise as though it were confirmed evidence is exactly the kind of thing that has already caused real, documented harm in this case, in the form of threats serious enough that federal resources have had to get involved in addressing them. If that background audio theory is ever formally authenticated by law enforcement, by a named forensic expert, by anyone with actual standing to make that call, we will bring you that update immediately, and we will treat it with the full weight it deserves. Until that happens, it stays exactly where careful reporting has to keep it, as an unconfirmed theory, not a fact. Now let's get into the data that doesn't require any interpretation at all. This next part isn't a theory. It isn't someone's interpretation of static. It's a downloaded data file, pulled directly off a physical device, logged by a state Marine Patrol officer under a signed permission to search form as part of an official report. If there's one single piece of evidence in this entire case that deserves to be taken completely at face value, it's this one. Most modern boats, especially ones used regularly for offshore trips, are equipped with a chart plotter. That's a small onboard computer connected to GPS that displays the boat's position on a digital map in real time and quietly logs that position at regular intervals in the background, whether the operator ever looks at it or not. That log exists purely for navigation purposes. Nobody on that boat that day was thinking about the fact that their exact position and speed were being silently recorded every few seconds. That's precisely what makes this kind of data so valuable to investigators. It doesn't rely on anyone's memory of a chaotic afternoon. It doesn't rely on anyone's willingness to be honest. It's simply a machine quietly doing its job with no stake in the outcome of anything. According to the official report, on July 8th, 4 days after Nolan went missing, a Mississippi Department of Marine Resources officer was assigned to download the GPS chart plotter data from 2 separate vessels connected to that day. The officer met separately with the individuals connected to each boat, obtained signed permission to search, and extracted the data directly from each unit's Garmin chart plotter using a memory card. The files were converted from the plotter's native format into a more universal format, then plotted over satellite imagery, producing a documented, time-stamped route for the boat Nolan had been on that day. Here is what that timeline shows. And we're going to walk through it slowly, because every single timestamp here matters, and rushing through it would do this evidence a disservice. The vessel left its dock at approximately 9:56 in the morning and arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. That's a trip a little over an hour, entirely consistent with a normal, ordinary boat ride out to a barrier island for a holiday. Between then and 4:30 that afternoon, the boat's position was stationary, consistent with a boat anchored offshore, while its passengers spent the afternoon on the beach. Nothing unusual there at all. That's exactly what you'd expect from a normal beach day. And it's worth saying plainly that this entire stretch of the timeline lines up perfectly with an ordinary 4th of July outing. Then, between 4:31 and 5:24 in the afternoon, the data shows the vessel departing the western tip of Horn Island, heading northbound at a speed ranging between roughly 0.6 of a knot and just over 4 knots for nearly 53 straight minutes. To put that in plain terms, that is walking pace, slower than walking pace in parts, across a distance of about 2.7 miles. At 5:25, according to the same data, the vessel's speed suddenly increases to somewhere between 30 and 35 knots, a completely normal cruising speed for a boat like this one, and it makes a direct run back toward the dock, arriving at approximately 5:44. Sit with that gap for a second, because it's the single most important thing the GPS data actually tells us tonight, and it needs no theory, no disputed audio, and no speculation to be genuinely significant. A boat that is taking on water, whose occupants are calling for emergency towing assistance, does not typically crawl across open water at walking pace for the better part of an hour. Think about the actual physics here briefly. A boat losing a fight with rising water inside its hull is, if anything, becoming progressively harder to steer and slower to respond as more weight settles low in the vessel. That would tend to produce an even more urgent, more direct route toward help, not a slow, meandering crawl at a pace a person could match by walking along the shore. A boat in genuine distress moves toward help, toward shore, toward anything that stops the clock, and it generally does that with urgency. Then the instant it picks up to normal cruising speed, it goes essentially in a straight line for the dock. That combination, 53 minutes at a crawl followed by an abrupt, purposeful sprint home, is the kind of pattern that raises a completely fair, completely reasonable question on its own, with zero need for anyone to claim they can hear anything in the background of a phone call to explain it. But the boat's day, according to the same GPS record, did not end when it reached the dock at 5:44. At 5:52, just 8 minutes later, it left the dock again, heading east into Fort Bayou, a body of water separate from the open Gulf, closer to shore, generally calmer, and used regularly by local boaters. It returned at 6:06, a trip of roughly 14 minutes round trip. Then at 6:36, half an hour later, it departed again, this time on a considerably longer route, heading southwest toward St. Martin Bayou, then curving southeast, past Biloxi Bay Bridge, before turning back north to an entirely different boat launch on Fort Bayou, arriving there at 7:19. That's a stretch of over 40 minutes of additional movement along a route that touches multiple separate bodies of water, well after the boat had already once reached what would seem like its logical destination for the evening. Then at 7:47, according to the data, the vessel was pulled from the water entirely and trailered overland to a private residence. From that point on, according to the available data, it didn't move again that night. That is 4 separate documented movements after the boat first reached shore that evening. Not one. And the public explanation that's been offered so far for this sequence of movements accounts for a single stop tied to a mechanical fix, replacing a boat plug, a small part that seals the drain hole used to empty water from a hull when a boat is out of the water. That is a real, ordinary, small maintenance task that boaters do handle from time to time. But a single explanation for a single stop doesn't on its own account for 4 separate documented movements spanning nearly 2 hours across multiple different waterways, hours before anyone had reported Nolan missing. We want to be careful and precise about how we frame this, because it would be easy to slide straight from this timeline hasn't been fully explained yet into this proves something happened, and those are 2 very different statements. What we can say honestly is this. The publicly available GPS record shows a documented sequence of movements that has not yet been fully publicly reconciled with the public account of that evening. That gap between the record and the explanation is real, it's serious, and it's exactly the kind of discrepancy that a formal investigation, and eventually a grand jury, exists to actually sort through with the full weight of subpoena power and sworn testimony behind it. It is not, on its own, proof of wrongdoing by any specific person. It is a documented discrepancy that deserves a real, complete answer. And as of tonight, the public has not been given one. We're not going to tell you what that gap means. We genuinely don't know. And neither does anyone honestly reporting on this case right now. What we can tell you is that it's a real documented gap between the public account and the GPS record, and it's the kind of gap that formal investigators with the ability to compel sworn testimony and cross-reference it against hard data like this are specifically positioned to actually resolve in a way that no amount of online speculation ever can. If that GPS timeline, the 53 minutes at walking pace, the 4 unexplained stops, is what actually changed how you're thinking about this case, then you understand exactly why this channel exists. To bring you breakdowns built on documents, not theories. The only way we can keep doing this is if enough of you decide to join instead of just watching once and moving on. Take a second, hit subscribe to Mr. Story's Crime Vault, turn on notifications, and you'll be here the moment any of this gets a real official explanation. Thank you for sticking with us this far. Let's get into the autopsy findings next, because they matter every bit as much as the timeline we just walked through. 22 days into this case, and there is still no official cause of death, no official manner of death, and no confirmed date of death on record for Nolan Wells. That single fact should be sitting at the center of every conversation about this case. And this week it finally got addressed directly at a national podium by the forensic pathologist the family personally commissioned. Dr. Roger Mitchell, a forensic pathologist retained by the Wansley family and funded in part by Colin Kaepernick, delivered his preliminary findings at a press conference held during a national civil rights convention in Chicago. Attorney Ben Crump read from the report at the podium. The conclusion was direct and frankly sobering in how little it was able to determine. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. Date of death, unknown. It's worth actually explaining what those 3 separate terms mean in a real forensic sense, because they each carry specific, distinct meaning, and lumping them together loses something important. Cause of death refers to the actual physical mechanism that ended someone's life. Drowning, blunt force trauma, cardiac event, and so on. When a pathologist rules that undetermined, it means the physical evidence available to them at the time of the examination simply wasn't sufficient to identify that mechanism with confidence. Manner of death is a separate, broader classification, sorting a death into one of a small number of categories. Accident, homicide, suicide, natural causes, or undetermined, based on the surrounding circumstances as much as the physical findings themselves. Ruling manner of death as undetermined means the evidence didn't clearly support any one of those categories over the others. Date of death, meanwhile, is exactly what it sounds like. An estimate of when death actually occurred, which pathologists typically calculate using a combination of factors, including body temperature, rigidity, and the stage of decomposition present at the time of examination. Ruling that unknown means the body's condition after time spent in warm Gulf Coast water no longer allowed for a reliable estimate. Dr. Mitchell's report did document one specific physical finding worth noting clearly, because it is a documented observation, not a theory. He noted a focal area of discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. To be precise about what that is and isn't, it was described as discoloration, not a fracture. And the report is clear that decomposition had progressed to the point where a complete forensic review of that area, and of the body more broadly, was no longer possible. It's worth understanding briefly why decomposition matters so much here. A body recovered from warm water after several days undergoes changes that can obscure or destroy the kinds of subtle tissue evidence that would otherwise help distinguish between, for example, bruising that occurred while someone was still alive and discoloration that developed naturally after death, simply from lying in one position in water. That distinction is often the difference between a finding that supports a theory of trauma and one that doesn't. And in this case, the report is explicit that decomposition had already closed that door by the time the examination took place. That means the specific finding cannot on its own be read as proof of blunt force trauma, and also cannot be simply dismissed as meaningless. It is a documented observation that the state's own autopsy, conducted 15 days earlier on July 7th, has never publicly addressed one way or the other, because the state's findings have not been released to anyone outside that office. Ben Crump has made one particular point about this case that deserves to be repeated plainly, because it's the kind of thing that gets lost in the noise. Nolan Wells could swim. When a death investigation involves a body recovered from water and the victim was a capable swimmer, the question of exactly how that person actually entered the water in the first place isn't a minor detail to be assumed away. It's one of the central questions the entire investigation needs to answer. And right now, on the record from either autopsy, it hasn't been. 2 separate autopsies conducted by 2 separate pathologists in 2 separate states, roughly 1,000 miles apart, and as of tonight, neither one has produced a confirmed final answer for this family. That's worth sitting with for a moment on its own, entirely apart from anything else in this case. 22 days, and the most basic medical question anyone can ask about a death, what actually killed this person, remains formally unanswered by either process. The state autopsy, conducted at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7th, remains entirely unreleased. In a development that came the day after Dr. Mitchell's press conference in Chicago, District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath confirmed publicly that the state's report will not be released to anyone, not the family, not the public, until a grand jury has had the opportunity to review it first. She stated plainly that every non-natural death in Jackson County follows that same process as a matter of standard procedure. It's worth explaining exactly what a grand jury actually is and does, because the phrase gets thrown around constantly in coverage of cases like this one, often without much explanation of what it actually means in practice. A grand jury is a panel of ordinary citizens, typically somewhere between 15 and 25 people depending on the jurisdiction, who are convened specifically to review evidence that a prosecutor chooses to present to them and to decide as a group whether there's enough evidence to support formally moving forward with criminal charges. It is fundamentally different from a trial. There's no defense attorney presenting a counter-argument in that room. There's no judge weighing in on the evidence itself. It's a prosecutor laying out what they have, and a panel of citizens deciding, based purely on that presentation, whether probable cause exists to move forward. Grand jury proceedings themselves are also, in almost every jurisdiction, legally secretive. No media coverage of what's actually said inside that room. No public record of who testified or what was presented. That secrecy exists by design, to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation and to prevent premature public judgment before formal charges, if any, are actually filed. The district attorney's office has also said directly that the restraint in sharing details of an ongoing investigation isn't a refusal to eventually share the truth. It's described as a commitment to protecting the integrity of the process that's meant to allow the truth to come out with real confidence behind it, rather than in pieces prematurely, in a way that could compromise it. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and it's worth sitting with that tension honestly, instead of collapsing it into a simple villain narrative. Standard procedure explains why a report gets withheld until a grand jury reviews it. It does not, on its own, explain away 22 days without so much as a preliminary cause of death being confirmed to a grieving family who is legally entitled under Mississippi law to certain baseline information about their own son's death within a specific window of time that has already passed. There's also a fair, honest question buried underneath all of this about pace, and it's worth naming directly rather than dancing around it. Cases involving remote locations, open water, no security cameras, no cell coverage, and a group of witnesses who are still teenagers or barely out of their teens are, almost across the board, genuinely difficult for investigators to move quickly on, no matter how competent or well-resourced the agency handling them happens to be. There's no doorbell camera to pull. There's no store receipt with a timestamp. There's only human memory, which is unreliable under stress even from honest witnesses, physical evidence that has to survive both saltwater and the passage of time, and a small number of digital records like the GPS data we just walked through, that have to be formally requested, extracted, and cross-referenced before anyone can say anything with real confidence. That context doesn't erase the 72-hour reporting window that passed without the family receiving anything. It does help explain why a case like this one can look from the outside like it's crawling along, while investigators on the inside may genuinely be working through a complex, overlapping set of processes at the same time, each with its own separate timeline and its own separate standard for what actually counts as confirmed. Here's a development that didn't come with a press conference, didn't come with Ben Crump standing at a podium, and almost got lost entirely underneath everything else that's happened in this case this week. Christine Wansley has filed in court to be formally named administrator of her son's estate, quietly, without a press conference. Just a mother and a legal filing. It's worth explaining plainly what that actually means, because on its face it can sound almost bureaucratic, and it is anything but. Being named administrator of an estate is the legal process by which a court formally grants a person authority to act on behalf of someone who has died. To access their accounts, their records, their belongings, and relevant to this specific case, potentially their digital devices and communications, with actual legal standing behind that access, rather than simply being asked to wait for someone else to hand it over voluntarily. Normally, this kind of filing is a quiet administrative step that most families handle privately, dealing with bank accounts, personal property, and other ordinary matters left behind. In the context of an active, unresolved death investigation, though, it takes on a different kind of weight, because it means Christine now has formal legal authority tied specifically to her son, authority that doesn't depend on anyone else's cooperation or goodwill. 22 days into an investigation where Christine has already had to track her own son's phone down herself using a family location-sharing app, has already had to meet a deputy in a McDonald's parking lot to report him missing because nobody could immediately tell her which agency even had jurisdiction, and has already had to wait well past her legally entitled 72-hour window for a basic incident report, filing to become the legal administrator of her son's estate reads less like paperwork and more like a mother who has run out of patience with waiting to be handed things and has decided instead to build her own legal standing to go get them herself. Let's bring all of this together honestly, exactly the way we opened tonight's video, by clearly separating what's actually documented from what's still just a theory circulating online, no matter how compelling that theory might feel. Confirmed. A call was placed to a private towing company, not 911, not the Coast Guard, reporting a boat as taking on water near the western tip of Horn Island. Confirmed. On that same call, the caller said Coast Guard assistance was not needed and struggled to identify a membership account. Confirmed. A separate account, given to the same dispatcher within minutes, suggested help might no longer even be needed. Confirmed. GPS data extracted directly from that vessel's own onboard chart plotter by a state marine patrol officer, under a signed permission to search form, shows the boat traveling at walking pace or slower for approximately 53 minutes before abruptly returning to normal cruising speed and heading straight for the dock. Confirmed. That same GPS data shows 4 separate documented movements of the boat after it first reached shore that evening, only one of which has a clear public explanation attached to it so far. Confirmed. An independent autopsy commissioned by the family concluded with an undetermined cause of death, an undetermined manner of death, and an unknown date of death, while also documenting a specific area of discoloration at the back of Nolan's head that decomposition prevented further examination of. Confirmed. The state's own autopsy, conducted 15 days before that independent one, remains entirely unreleased, and the district attorney has said publicly it will stay that way until a grand jury reviews it. Confirmed. Christine Wansley has filed in court to become the legal administrator of her son's estate. Unconfirmed, and treated tonight strictly as a circulating theory rather than established fact. Specific words allegedly audible in the background of that towing call, including a name being called, a question about whether someone is dead, and an instruction to check someone's chest. No law enforcement agency and no named credentialed forensic audio expert has gone on record confirming or denying that interpretation, Until that changes, it stays exactly where we've kept it all night. In this column, not the one above it. Unresolved entirely. What actually explains a 53-minute crawl at walking pace? What actually explains the additional stops the boat made after reaching shore that evening? What the state's autopsy actually concludes whenever it's finally released? Whether the discoloration Dr. Mitchell documented has any connection to how Nolan ended up in the water in the first place. And underneath every single one of those questions, the one that's been sitting there since the very first night. What happened to Nolan Wells? No individual has been named a suspect. No charges have been filed against anyone in this case. The disputed audio interpretation you may have seen elsewhere online has not been confirmed by anyone with the authority to actually confirm it. What has been confirmed is a documented, unexplained gap in a GPS timeline, an autopsy that raised more questions than it answered, and a mother who, 22 days in, has stopped waiting for anyone to hand her anything and gone to a courthouse to build her own legal standing instead. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He told his mother he loved her the night before he left for that island, the way he always did, on a night that looked exactly like every other night before it. 22 days later, she is still waiting for an answer to the only question that has ever actually mattered here. What happened to my son? If after everything we walked through tonight, you had to pick just one single word to describe where this case genuinely stands right now, drop that word in the comments below. Not a theory, not a guess at what happened, just one honest word that captures it for you. We're going to read through every single one of those. If tonight's breakdown gave you a clearer, more honest picture of exactly where this case stands than the version you may have seen elsewhere online, that's exactly what we set out to do. And it means a great deal that you stayed with us through all of it. One last ask, and then we'll let you go. We can see clearly that far more of you watch these Nolan Wells updates than are actually subscribed to Mr. Story's Crime Vault. And if tonight's breakdown earned it, close that gap for us right now. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and you'll be here the moment any of what we covered tonight, the audio, the timeline, either autopsy, actually gets a real official answer. We'll see you in the next update.